Hey, Teddy K here for the Best Buy blog, and in this video review, we look at the Sony Alpha 1, Sony's best mirrorless camera, and arguably the best mirrorless camera you can get your hands on right now. I think the best way to describe the Sony Alpha 1 is that it's just not a toy in any way. This is a tool. If you are serious about photography in any way, this is one of the cameras you're going to want to think about because it takes exceptional photos. This is one of the, to me personally, I mean, this is one of the finest cameras I've ever used. It just captures incredible photos, especially when you use it the right way. And so it's not so much that I don't want to talk about features necessarily, because I think the spec sheet speaks for itself. But the 50 megapixel sensor is great because it gives you a lot to work with. So even if you shoot wide, if you don't have to shoot in the tight as much, you don't have to crop in as much when you're actually framing the shot, because you can just crop and post, right? So you shoot in RAW like I do, you're going to get some real results with this, especially when you work on them in Lightroom or whatever program you prefer. That's, to me, the beauty of this. I was fortunate that I got to also test this with a really good lens. So this is the 24 to 70 millimeter G Master 2. Put these two together and you have a very expensive price tag to begin with, and you are also, well, you should be getting some value for that money, right? I mean, it's a lot of money when you put these two together, and I'm happy to say that you do get a lot for what you're paying for, which is great, because what you have is a versatile camera that can shoot really well in a variety of conditions. So it could be daylight, nighttime, winter, summer, it doesn't really matter. You can shoot a lot of video with this, including 8K. You can shoot in burst, so burst shooting is excellent as well. There's some caveats to doing that, using like the electric shutter and shooting in a compressed RAW, for example. But otherwise, there's a lot here, and so the handling is pretty much what I'd expect from a Sony Alpha body. So coming from an A7 III like I was, it felt pretty familiar. It's a little heftier, a little heavier for sure, and certainly because of the lens, which has its own weight. But there's no question that it is a sturdy piece of kit, and the electric viewfinder is fantastic. I say the electronic viewfinder, I should say, is fantastic. And you have a number of ports as well on the side, just sort of indicating just how serious this thing is, including an HDMI, full Ethernet port, obviously for microphone, headphone, USB-C. You've got all that. You can use CF Express cards or micro SD or SD cards. So you've got fast cards you can use with this as well. You have a lot of granular control with a new look menu system that I think is worth mentioning. I've never been a fan of Sony's menu system. I find it confusing and convoluted. I know that I'm not alone, because it seems to come up a lot with anybody that is reviewing or using a Sony camera. But in this case, at least it's better. It's not great, but it's a little better. I still found it a bit confusing, because where I thought some things would be, they weren't. And so I still had to search for certain features and functions, but I did find them. So I recommend, even if you are upgrading to this from another Sony camera, spend some time with the menu system to learn it, because I think it's going to be worth your while, just so you know where everything is and you can get to it quickly. I mean, time is of the essence when you're shooting with something like this, and especially when you're shooting something good. Now, as I'm talking here, I'm going to show some photos, and you're going to see a mix of various shots in a variety of conditions. I just tried to shoot whatever I could. And I did use this also for my job, so shooting product, things like that. And what stood out to me was more the simplicity in what I was shooting. So it didn't really matter what the subject was. The camera just found a way to make it work for me. So as long as I knew what to do and what kind of settings I wanted, it just seemed to me like, even when I thought a photo was underexposed or overexposed, but especially if it was underexposed, I could pull out quite a bit of detail from the raw file in Lightroom afterward. That is great. I mean, it's just one of those things where if you feel like you made a mistake or you misread the lighting situation when you're shooting, you're going to be fine, because chances are the camera actually saves you from yourself. It's always nice to have that when you have a camera in hand that can perform this way. What also struck me was also the tracking, which was excellent. Typical eye face tracking that you would expect from Sony for humans and animals as well. What I liked was just how easy it was to do that. So I could track a subject that was moving and then just snap, and it was great. Like just freeze it in motion. It got a little more complicated at times if there was a group of subjects, so like a group of people who were moving around. So, shooting a college basketball game, that at times, I couldn't really focus on faces necessarily. So I tried to just follow the action as best as I could. But at times, though, it just honed right in on what I wanted to do, who I was looking for, and who I was shooting, and came out with great results. So, and the same goes for video, by the way. So if you're shooting video with this, and I did shoot some video with it, again, great results, really crisp, clean, really good footage that you could really work with in post afterwards as well. So if you're thinking of this for video on top of stills, you really can't go wrong. Even if your main purpose is video, you feel like you could really make something work with all the features in here, I actually wouldn't blame you for thinking that, because as a video camera, it does excellent work. It doesn't overheat either, which is always nice to have, especially if you're shooting in 4K or 8K for a longer period of time. I noticed that I did some testing just to see what would happen, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that it didn't get too hot. A couple of drawbacks, obviously, besides the hefty price, is the battery life is not great. You probably would want to get a backup battery for this, especially if you plan to shoot in the field for a considerable amount of time in a day. You're probably not going to make it. I can't even quantify for you how many shots it would take, because it's impossible to tell. It depends on what kind of quality you're shooting at. It depends if it's a mix of stills and video. So I'm not even going to bother giving you a number. All I can tell you is that if you are going to be out there for a full day and you feel like you're going to, you need it for the full day, obviously, and you want it to work and you don't want to run low, get a backup battery just for that peace of mind, because I just don't think the single battery is going to make it. My other gripe is the screen. Now, the screen's nice to look at. I just hate the fact that it doesn't articulate. It tilts just like every other Sony camera does. And I just don't understand that at this price point, why you wouldn't just put in a screen that articulates, that flips, so that way you can shoot from a variety of angles a lot easier than you can right now. Part of the problem here is that with the electronic viewfinder, when you look through it, you'll notice that when you look at it, the camera from the top angle, it protrudes a fair bit. So even if you were to tilt the screen, like you're shooting from a lower angle and you're tilting the screen to see it at a 90-degree angle, you're actually going to miss a fair part of the image, because on the screen, I mean, because the viewfinder is in the way. This would have been fixed if there was an articulating screen, but unfortunately there's not. So you have to improvise like you would with any other Sony Alpha camera that doesn't have an articulating screen. It's something that, unfortunately, I found maddening at times when shooting with this, especially when trying to get creative with angles. I'm just going to summarize quickly by reiterating the fact that this is not something that you graduate to from a smartphone, for example. If you're shooting with a smartphone and you want to get serious about photography, you'll certainly get serious with this, but you have to know what you're doing. I mean, there's nothing automated here. Like, this is a camera that you're going to use. There's an auto mode, but I mean, it shouldn't even be on here, because frankly, this is the kind of camera that you should have a lot of granular control. You should understand the granular control that you have with it. And it's the kind of camera that, of course, can make you a better photographer as you learn it. But this is like one of the pinnacles, right? So it's a serious camera for a serious photographer. You don't necessarily have to be a pro. But you have to be a serious amateur, or just, interested enough and experienced enough where you're graduating to this, you already know a fair bit, but you're looking for that next step, and you're willing to pay for it, of course. And that's my review of the Sony Alpha 1 for the Best Buy blog. I'm Teddy K. Thanks for watching.